Patricia Langford was a woman of status, wealth, and expectation. She had spent years cultivating a life of privilege, where everything functioned exactly as she believed it should. A seasoned traveller, she was intimately familiar with the comforts of first-class air travel, the priority boarding, the complimentary champagne, the hushed conversations between professionals who, like her, belonged in that exclusive space. To Patricia, first class was more than just a ticket. It was a symbol of distinction, a clear separation between people like her and those she considered beneath the experience. As she strolled through Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her designer carry-on gliding smoothly behind her, she hardly paid attention to the routine around her. This was familiar territory, a predictable part of her life. But when she reached her row and saw a black man sitting in the seat beside hers, her steps faltered. He was dressed sharply, his navy blue suit crisp and tailored. His posture exuded quiet confidence, his attention fixed on the screen of his open laptop. He looked like he belonged, but to Patricia that couldn't be right. Her initial reaction was subtle, a tightening of her lips, a barely perceptible shift in her demeanor, but inside, her mind raced. First class wasn't supposed to be like this. She set her designer tote down a little too forcefully, her displeasure barely masked. She expected exclusivity, and the presence of this man, this stranger who didn't fit her expectations, unsettled her. Patricia had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who reflected her own world, and she had come to believe that was how things should remain. With a sharp inhale, she composed herself, already forming a plan to restore order, to correct what she saw as a mistake. As Patricia settled into her seat, her discomfort grew. The presence of the black man beside her felt like an intrusion into the world she had carefully constructed, a world where she expected to be surrounded by people she deemed appropriate for first class. His quiet confidence only aggravated her unease. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or seek validation. He was simply there, absorbed in his work, as if he belonged. But Patricia wasn't convinced. Her mind clung to the notion that this must be some sort of mistake. Maybe the airline had mixed up the seating. Maybe he had wandered into the wrong section. She glanced around, expecting someone to correct this oversight. When no one did, she took matters into her own hands. Leaning slightly toward him, she chose her words carefully, her voice polished with forced politeness. "Excuse me," she said, her tone laced with passive skepticism. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" The man, still focused on his laptop, barely acknowledged her. "Yes," he replied simply, offering no further explanation. His lack of elaboration frustrated her. He didn't feel the need to justify his presence, and that bothered her more than she cared to admit. Patricia cleared her throat, glancing around once more before signaling for a flight attendant. Emily Jacobs, a professional yet approachable young woman, approached with a polite smile. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Patricia forced a chuckle, as if she found the situation amusing. "I think there's been a little mix-up," she said, gesturing toward the man beside her. "I believe he's in the wrong seat." But as Emily scanned the passenger manifest, Patricia's certainty began to waver. The man, Daniel Stokes, was exactly where he was supposed to be. And for the first time, Patricia felt a flicker of doubt. Patricia Langford was not the type of woman to let things go. The flight attendant had assured her that Daniel Stokes was in the correct seat, but that answer didn't satisfy her. She had spent years accustomed to having her concerns addressed immediately, her preferences prioritized. If she was uncomfortable, then surely something needed to change. She sat stiffly, arms crossed over her chest, her mind racing. Daniel, meanwhile, remained focused on his laptop, unbothered by the interaction. He hadn't even reacted, not a word of reassurance, not an attempt to placate her discomfort. That only made her more determined. Pressing her lips into a thin line, she reached up and pushed the call button. A soft chime rang overhead, and within moments, Emily Jacobs returned. Is there something else I can assist you with, ma'am? She asked, still maintaining her professional demeanor. Patricia leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I'd like to request a seat change. Emily blinked. Oh, are you uncomfortable? Is there an issue with your seat? Patricia hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her head. It's not the seat, she said slowly, tilting her head toward Daniel. I just don't feel comfortable sitting here. Emily's smile faltered, her eyes flicking briefly to Daniel, who had now paused his typing. He still didn't say a word, but his posture had shifted slightly, his fingers resting on the closed laptop. He was listening. Emily straightened. Let me check if there are any open seats, she said, tapping at her tablet. The silence stretched as Patricia waited. Finally, Emily looked up. I'm afraid we're at full capacity today, ma'am. There aren't any open first-class seats available. Patricia's stomach clenched. This wasn't going how she had envisioned. And in economy? She asked, her voice a little sharper. Emily hesitated before nodding. There are 2 open seats in economy. Patricia straightened, the solution clear. Perfect. He can take one of them. The tension in the cabin grew palpable. A few passengers glanced up, their attention now fully on the unfolding scene. Across the aisle, a businessman muttered under his breath. Emily's expression hardened. Ma'am, just to clarify, you want me to move Mr. Stokes to economy because you don't want to sit next to him? Yes, Patricia said firmly. Emily inhaled through her nose. That won't be happening. Patricia's face flushed with frustration. This was not how things were supposed to go. She had made what she believed to be a reasonable request, yet the flight attendant had outright refused her. Worse, people were watching. She could feel the weight of their stares, the subtle shifts in posture as passengers leaned in, pretending not to listen, but clearly absorbing every word. She wasn't about to back down. If appealing to reason hadn't worked, she would escalate. She pressed the call button again, her movements sharper this time. When Emily returned, her professional smile was still in place, but there was a new edge to her expression. Patricia sat up straighter. I need to speak to someone in charge, she demanded. Emily's eyes flickered with something, exasperation perhaps, but her tone remained neutral. I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight, ma'am. Is there something I can clarify for you? Patricia's voice tightened. I need to speak to the head crew member, or the pilot. A quiet murmur spread through the cabin. A man in a suit let out a low chuckle. Someone else shook their head. The young woman 3 rows back raised her phone just slightly, pretending to text, but clearly recording. Emily's patience was wearing thin. Ma'am, the pilot is preparing for takeoff and is not available. I assure you, I am the highest-ranking crew member who can address your concerns. Patricia's fingers curled into fists. She could feel control slipping through her grasp, and so she played the only card she had left. Lowering her voice just enough to be heard without shouting, she said, I don't feel safe. The effect was immediate. The entire cabin seemed to still. Emily stiffened. Daniel, who had remained silent up until now, slowly closed his laptop. He didn't say anything, but his eyes locked onto Patricia's, unreadable yet unwavering. Across the aisle, a businessman scoffed. Here we go again, he muttered under his breath. Emily's voice was carefully measured. Ma'am, are you saying you feel threatened? Patricia tilted her head slightly, giving a small shrug. I'm not saying that. I just don't feel comfortable. The moment stretched uncomfortably. Emily inhaled deeply, then straightened. Ma'am, you have 2 choices. Remain seated and follow flight crew instructions, or deplane. But Mr. Stokes is not moving. Patricia's pulse pounded. She had lost control. Patricia felt her stomach twist as the flight attendant's words settled in. This wasn't how things were supposed to unfold. She had expected agreement, maybe even quiet sympathy, not outright defiance. Worse, the people around her, the other first-class passengers who usually shared her sense of exclusivity, weren't supporting her. Instead, they were watching, some with barely concealed amusement, others with open disapproval. She opened her mouth to protest, to argue that she had every right to feel uncomfortable, that she was the one being treated unfairly. But before she could speak, Daniel Stokes moved. Not to argue, not to defend himself, but to calmly reach into his pocket. The simple act sent a ripple of tension through the air. Then he pulled out a leather case, flipped it open, and held it up for her and everyone else to see. A golden FBI badge gleamed under the cabin lights. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's entire body went rigid. Passengers let out quiet gasps, some whispering in disbelief. A woman 3 rows back zoomed in with her phone, recording every second. A businessman nearby let out a low chuckle. Daniel's voice was smooth, unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, tilting his head slightly, "would you like to file an official complaint? I can take your statement right now." Patricia's breath hitched. Her throat went dry. The words she had carefully chosen, the implication of danger, the subtle accusations, suddenly felt like a trap closing in on her. Daniel didn't blink, didn't look away. He simply waited. Patricia's pulse pounded in her ears. If she doubled down, if she insisted she still felt unsafe, she would be accusing a federal agent of being a threat on a flight. That was serious, something that could spiral into legal consequences. But if she backed down, she would have to acknowledge, even if silently, that she had been wrong. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. The power she thought she had, the quiet privilege that had worked in so many situations before, was gone. The control she had counted on had slipped entirely from her grasp. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she shook her head, barely a movement. "No complaint," she croaked. Daniel nodded once, as if he had expected that. He tucked his badge back into his jacket, reopened his laptop, and resumed typing, completely unbothered. For Patricia, though, it was far from over. Patricia sat frozen in her seat, staring straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. The humiliation burned deep. The moment Daniel had revealed his FBI badge, the power dynamic had shifted entirely. No one looked at her with sympathy now, only quiet judgment or barely contained amusement. Even the flight attendants, who had maintained a neutral professionalism, now carried a silent authority that made Patricia feel impossibly small. She forced herself to breathe evenly, but her mind was spinning. This was supposed to be a simple flight, a routine journey. She was supposed to glide effortlessly into Washington, D.C., untouched and unbothered, just as she always had. Instead, she had become the spectacle, the woman who had made a baseless accusation against a federal agent and been publicly exposed. And worst of all, people had seen it. A chime sounded from the seatbelt sign, signaling their descent. Patricia hardly registered it. Her phone vibrated in her purse, once, twice, then a third time. She hesitated before finally pulling it out. Her stomach dropped at the screen. Text messages flooded in. "Patricia, is this you? Oh my God, tell me this isn't real. I just saw the video. What did you do?" Her throat tightened as she quickly swiped to her notifications. Against her better judgment, she tapped open Twitter. She didn't even have to search. Her name was already trending. The video, the one she had desperately hoped would disappear, had already amassed over 97,000 views. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the replies. Karma is real. This lady really thought she could get away with it. This is what happens when privilege meets reality. She just tried to ruin a man's life and it backfired. I have zero sympathy. Patricia's vision blurred. The flight hadn't even landed yet, and she was already losing control of her own narrative. The moment the plane touched down, she unbuckled her seatbelt hastily, ready to escape. She needed to get out of here before things got worse. But as she hurried through the terminal at Reagan National Airport, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A small group of reporters had already gathered near baggage claim, microphones in hand, phones ready to record. And then one of them spotted her. "Wait, that's her." Patricia's heart pounded. This wasn't just an embarrassment anymore, it was a disaster. Patricia barely heard the murmurs as she rushed through the terminal, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She kept her head down, gripping the handle of her designer carry-on with white-knuckled fingers. The moment she had stepped off the plane, she had prayed, begged, for this to all be a bad dream, something she could escape by simply disappearing into the crowd. But now, staring at the growing group of reporters near baggage claim, she knew there was no escaping this. A woman in a navy blazer, microphone in hand, was already speaking into a camera. The now viral video shows an unidentified woman attempting to have an FBI agent removed from first class, citing discomfort. The clip has amassed over 1 million views in just a few hours. 1 million. Patricia's stomach churned. She turned sharply, hoping to slip away before anyone noticed her. But it was too late. A reporter caught sight of her, and their eyes lit up with recognition. "Wait! That's her!" A flood of voices followed. "Ms. Langford, do you have a response to the allegations? Why did you try to have a federal agent removed from his seat? Are you aware your name is trending on social media?" The questions came at her like bullets, rapid and merciless. Patricia's breath came fast and shallow. She pushed forward, shoving past travelers, desperate to get to the exit. Her phone vibrated again. Another call, another wave of texts. She ignored them, too afraid to look. But then, as she finally reached the curb, her phone buzzed with a notification she couldn't ignore. A call from James Rollins. Patricia hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said, voice tight. A brief silence. Then a clipped response. "Patricia, this is James Rollins, chair of the Marston Foundation. I assume you're aware of the situation." Her throat went dry. "James, We're going to need you to step down," he interrupted without hesitation. Patricia's knees nearly buckled. "Wait, what?" "This is non-negotiable," he said firmly. "We're issuing a public statement by morning. We expect your resignation by then." A sharp beep. He had hung up. Patricia stood frozen on the curb, gripping her phone as the reality set in. Her career, her reputation, everything she had built was gone. And somewhere in the city, Daniel Stokes had likely already moved on, completely unbothered. For him, this had been just another Tuesday. The story of Patricia Langford serves as a powerful lesson on humility, accountability, and the consequences of unchecked privilege. In a world where technology captures and spreads moments instantly, one's actions, especially those rooted in prejudice, can have lasting repercussions. Patricia assumed she could manipulate the situation to suit her comfort, never considering the possibility of being held accountable. However, the truth prevailed, and the power she once wielded disappeared in an instant. For older generations, this serves as a reminder that character matters more than status. Respect and kindness should extend to everyone, regardless of background. Assumptions based on appearances can lead to grave misjudgments, and in today's interconnected world, fairness and integrity are more valued than ever. Furthermore, it highlights the importance of adapting to change. Society is evolving, and so must we. Rather than clinging to outdated biases, embracing fairness and mutual respect ensures a lasting legacy built on dignity rather than regret. The way we treat others defines us far more than our wealth or influence. At any stage in life, humility and self-awareness can prevent irreversible mistakes.